free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. God save our American states! God save our American states!
Hello, I'm Terry Coleth. I'm here today with Professor Adrian Kerr. And in our next Academy class with Professor Kerr, we're going to launch our own celebration of Independence Day. And we're going to start with a prelude to the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, and then move on to a 5-week series on the history of the United States. Thanks for joining me, Adrian.
It's a pleasure. Always nice to be here at Shell Point.
Well, I like the fact that you're going to give us an overview, a prelude, because the Declaration of Independence, well, the Constitution for sure is in big demand, information about the Constitution right now. And I think it's very, very nice to go back and look at what was in their minds. What were they thinking?
Yes. It is. It's a fascinating process, and being a U.S. citizen, when I became was come up for interview, I felt I should really understand the mechanism by which the founding fathers, first of all, declared independence, but also how it evolved into a constitution which is accepted by these difficult states who had their own ideas of what their perfect government should be. And we start off with lessons from the history, of course. You know my style. Mm-hmm. And so there are, I won't jump to what the Constitution looks like today, but we'll actually go through the journey by which people of the intellect of the founding fathers, many were lawyers, had a grounding in some of the early concepts of government. Mm-hmm. So we go back to the Magna Carta, because many of the clauses of the Magna Carta, 1215, are embodied in the Bill of Rights.
Which is fascinating, isn't it? When we think it all started in the 1600s, it did not.
No, in fact, most of the folk that we look to for actually declaring independence and developing the Constitution and setting up the federal government had a great schooling in English history. I mean, their ancestors were from England, and it's not surprising that they brought with them 400 or 500 years of English law, which was imperfect, and England does not have a written constitution. So America is unusual and set the scene for all new countries, in that nearly all countries post the Americans' War of Independence, when they throw off their colonial powers or they change their government style, they nearly always say, we have to have a constitution. Some cases is revolving doors. Mm-hmm. In Thailand, which has had this flip-flop relationship between a form of democracy and government by the army, they've had 15 constitutions in about 35 years. So it can get out of control. Sure. And of course, the wonderful thing about the American Constitution is it's fixed. And we can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but changing the Constitution, as we'll discuss in this particular talk, is darned difficult because of the way in which it's constructed. And so we see very few changes in the Constitution, and in recent years, very few indeed. And it begs the question, what would lead to a change in the Constitution today? Now, we've had a couple of false starts. We had the change which introduced the abolishment of alcohol, mm-hmm. and then, oh dear, that didn't work out. Let's bring that back again. So there are two amendments to the Constitution which flipped. Interesting. And so there's also things like voting rights, mm-hmm. and equality between women and men and so on, and minorities. And there's a whole series of changes which we'll go through briefly. But the interesting thing is that many countries have constitutions followed in the American model, but they can be changed relatively easily. So you find this being done right now as we speak. They're changing constitutions in Thailand, in Turkey, and in Egypt. And often it's to allow the strong man, the general who's become politician, to stay indefinitely, which is anathema to the American system, mm-hmm. where George Washington absolutely, definitely, one, he didn't want to do the second term, and he certainly didn't want to die in office, because that would lead to some form of hereditary or ongoing leadership, and he hated that. So they brought in the two terms a little bit later, and that's hard to imagine that we would ever tinker with that. But quite a few countries are actually changing the Constitution regularly to suit the political flavor, which America does not do because it's so darn difficult.
Interesting. And I love the fact that you're going to put it into a perspective based on the past from where we start, the past that leads to where we start, and then we can see how it's all affecting us today. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I hope you'll be able to join us. I hope you'll be able to attend the prelude before you take the 5 courses that take you through the history of the United States. But if you're not able to, you will certainly be able to take any one of these classes standing alone and get some good information about your country.